6 o'clock. Let's get going here. And call the Oceanside Historic Preservation Advisory Commission special meeting, August 11th, to order. Let's all stand and have the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, before we begin the roll call of the people present, we would like to invite the people that are on the phone to identify themselves, so we know who's all joining us. This is really a test to see if the system is picking up these people that are on the phone. So if you're out there and you are going to participate, please identify yourself.
Yeah, hi, this is Dan Niebaum with the Lightfoot Planning Group. I'm the applicant's representative for item 1.
Dan, can you say your last name again?
Sure. Niebaum, N-I-E-B-A-U-M.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone else on the call?
You have Todd Cadwell and Darren Olson with the developer. Hello?
Todd, can you say your last name again slowly?
Cadwell, C-A-D-W-E-L-L.
Okay, and there was a second person from the developer that's also on the call?
Darren Olson, last name O-L-S-O-N.
Got it. All right, thank you. Is there anyone else
Welcome.
Is there anyone else on the call that is joining us?
Yeah, hi. This is Brian Davis with ATGY Group. We are the architects of the project.
Okay, Brian, can one more time with your last name, please?
Davis, D-A-V-S.
Davis, okay. And you're with the architect's office. Okay, very good. Is there anyone else available on the call? No. All right, having heard that, then I would like to take a roll call.
Good evening, Chairman Guttelli, Richard Greenbauer, Secretary to the Preservation Commission. And I just, before we get started and I take roll call, I just wanted to go ahead and recognize some new members that have joined the commission.
Thank you.
Mr. Kevin Slichowski, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, and Mr. Kevin Hunt. There are 2 new commissioners, and I will go ahead and proceed. And if I can remind everybody to, if you're talking today, we need to make sure that it gets recorded. So if you hit the green button, talk into the microphone real close. That way we can ensure that we get the full recording of the meeting. Thank you. And with that, we'll start with Commissioner Daly. Here. Commissioner Shees.
It's a little sticky. You have to hold it, push it and hold it.
All right. Commissioner Gustafson? Here. Commissioner Hunt?
Here.
Commissioner Slowowski?
Present.
All right. We have Vice Chair Aaron Mendibles not present at the meeting, and we'll put that on the record. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, at this time, having done the roll call, I would like to invite any comments from the audience that are not, on the planned agenda this evening. So we don't have anybody going to suggest something. All right, moving on to the next item on the agenda, I would like to move for an approval of the meetings from the prior, or the minutes from the prior meeting of July 2nd, 2019. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Then the approval of the minutes and July
Can we
2nd
get
has
a,
passed.
we have a motion for approval and a second. Can we get a vote by the members that were seating at the time? I believe Ms. Gustafson was here. July 2nd, okay. Chairman Guttelli?
Yes, approved.
Okay. Commissioner Daly? Yes. And Commissioner Shees?
Yes.
So that's 3 for approval.
All right.
1 absent, 3 that were not here.
So the motion passes for approval?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Having done that, let's move on. We have nothing on the consent calendar. So with that, Richard, if I may, I'd like to begin with the public hearing.
Correct.
The format, basically, at this point, will consist of a reading of the consideration, and then we'll have a discussion item and move on from there. All right, tonight's public hearing item is a consideration of Development Plan D19-00017, Conditional Use Permit CUP 19-00022, Historic Permit H19-00002, and Variance V20-00004 to construct a mixed-use project at the northeast corner of Douglas Drive and Highway 76, Mission Flats. The applicant is Mission Flats LLC. So, now, at this point, I would like to move for any commissioners that have any disclosures on this subject, and I will start. John? I'll start to my left.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have reviewed the staff report. The 2 sets of drawings that were submitted, were submitted to me, and I drove and walked the property today.
Very good.
And just for the record, that is Commissioner Shees.
Yes, sorry. Commissioner Daley?
Yes, I was on the property, reviewing the photo shoot, historic photo shoot, so we got an entitled the buildings. And other than that, there was someone there that was really not representing the development, so I have no contact with.
Okay, so you've also gone over the staff reports, I assume? Okay. All right, Commissioner Gustafson?
I've only reviewed what was provided with the staff reports and the.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Hunt, any disclosures?
I reviewed the figures provided and drove by the site today. Didn't go on the property.
Commissioner Silwoski?
It's Slavoski for everybody who's having trouble with it. I reviewed the enclosed materials, and I've driven by the site, but I've not walked it.
Okay, very good. And I have driven by the site many times and have read all the staff and background literature that was provided in the by the city. All right, having gone through that, I would like to begin with the testimony of Sharon Vitale, the planner, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Shannon Vitale, and I'm with the Planning Division. I'm here tonight to discuss the Mission Flats project. The project consists of a development plan, CUP, historic permit, variance to allow the construction of a mixed-use development comprised of 3,500 square feet of commercial space, 4,200 square feet amenity area and leasing office, 137 residential apartments, and outdoor recreational areas, including a pool, courtyard, and dog park. Since the project site is located in the historic district, staff is bringing the project to you for your consideration and recommendation prior to going to the Planning Commission. The project site, outlined in red on this slide, is located at the northeast corner of Douglas Drive and Highway 76. The site was once part of the Jones Ranch, and there are several barn structures and other ancillary buildings remaining on site. A historical assessment was done on the site and indicated the removal of the remaining structures would not require mitigation because the structures do not qualify for historical registration. Surrounding land uses include the Mission Douglas Plaza Shopping Center to the north, the Mission Real Shopping Center to the west, Highway 76 to the south, and open space to the east. The project area is located in the southwest portion of the Mission San Luis Rey Historic Area, outside of the historic core. The San Luis Rey Mission is approximately half a mile away from the project boundaries. Since the project is located in the Mission San Luis Rey Historic Area, the project is subject to the Historic Area Design Guidelines. Consistent with the design guidelines, the project was designed to complement and enhance the historic area. The project is designed in the Mission Revival architectural style. Specifically, the project incorporates the following features into its design, including single-barrel U-shaped ray clay tile roof, smooth white stucco walls, recessed window openings. A recessed arcade with arch entryways and column features as well as a prominent wooden entry door further enhance the design. Tower elements are also incorporated to provide additional visual interest and articulation. The rendering on this slide provides the view from Douglas Drive. The commercial space is located on the ground floor and is characterized by high-volume ceilings and arch entryways. There is a 10-foot recessed arcade and pedestrian walkway. The apartments, which range from 450 square feet to 1,100 square feet, are located above the commercial space and are arranged in a stacked configuration. All units will be accessed from interior courtyards and will open to the exterior via patios, balconies, or windows. This slide illustrates the south elevation of the buildings as viewed from Highway 76. The top photo illustrates the view as one is heading east on 76, while the bottom photo shows the heading west. Here are the views looking northeast and northwest from the Mission Douglas Plaza. Emphasis was placed on carrying the design guidelines of the historic area through to all elevations of the project. In conclusion, staff finds the project consistent with the design guidelines of the historic district and feels the project will help to enhance and complement the historic area. Staff recommends that OPAC adopt resolution number 2020-H01 to recommend approval of the development plan, CUP, historic permit, and variance. This concludes my presentation. The applicant has also prepared a presentation that I can play for you afterwards, and they will be available on the phone for follow-up questions and discussion. Thank you.
Okay, excuse me. Thank you, Shannon. Are you going to present the applicant's presentation now, or are you going to do it at the end?
I was going to do it now, if that's okay.
Okay, that is acceptable. Let's go.
Okay, great. It's a pre-recorded presentation, so I will.
Fine.
Good evening, members of the Commission. I'm Dan Niebaum with the Lightfoot Planning Group with offices in Carlsbad. I'm serving as the applicant's representative on the Mission Flats project. And with me tonight is the project proponent, Todd Cadwell with Realm, and also with us is Brian Davis with KTGY, who's the project architect. We appreciate staff's presentation tonight, and we have a short presentation just to offer a few additional comments regarding the proposed project. This team's really excited to bring forward Mission Flats as a mixed-use infill development in this area of Oceanside. We've appreciated the opportunity to collaborate with staff throughout the project design process to incorporate historic design elements into the project as recommended and suggested by staff. And we've also worked with the Planning Commission Design Review Committee to consider their comments and incorporate several items that we discussed with them into the project. We're located within the historic area, but not in the historic core. And this site at this location has had some unique site challenges due to the shape of the site and proximity to the Highway 76 right-of-way and the grading that's along that right-of-way. But we believe we've successfully responded with a design that really respects the historic character of Mission San Luis Rey and evokes the Mission Revival style. As staff had touched on, the site is surrounded by the Highway 76 corridor on the southeast boundary, the Mission Douglas Commercial Center on the north, and the Mission Plaza Commercial Center to the east. The nearest portion of the Mission San Luis Rey grounds is actually located approximately a quarter mile to the northeast, with the primary mission buildings located almost a half mile to the northeast. And there's no direct visibility or noted views to or from the Mission San Luis Rey that would be affected by the proposed development of this site. And as an infill project, the proposed mixed-use development will complement the surrounding commercial uses, provide a quality residential resource, and support pedestrian connections to adjacent commercial areas. And also with the project's proximity to the Mission San Luis Rey, residents will be able to readily access and experience this significant cultural resource. And the next two slides are simply intended to better show the project's location within the Mission San Luis Rey historic area. This slide and this exhibit is taken from the Historic Area Design Guidelines document, and the site is outlined in yellow at the northeast corner of Douglas and Highway 76. And this slide will simply show the site location proximity away from the historic core of the historic area. Again, the original exhibit taken from the Design Guidelines document. The following photos will help to provide additional context related to the site surroundings. This view, of course, is Douglas Drive along the site frontage, looking to the south. The southerly boundary of the site along Highway 76 is shown here, along with the existing berm and tree landscaping that will help to provide an additional screening buffer along this side of the project. And this view is looking to the north and west along Douglas Drive from the project frontage, showing the commercial centers that are adjacent to the project site. The project team has worked diligently with staff to ensure a design solution which respects the historic area aesthetic. To that end, the project integrates significant elements such as these into the overall design. The design presents a robust mixture of building form and mass, with an emphasis on creating upper story recesses and offset planes. A series of courtyard areas and enhanced public spaces are integrated with the design, serving to organize the building form and provide a pedestrian-scaled aesthetic. The building presents a strong horizontal proportion, which is an important criterion of the Historic Area Design Guidelines. Variations in building form and setbacks and gable roof sections provide a design rhythm and help to break up the massing for the length of the southern elevation along the Highway 76 frontage. The elevations implement a variety of traditional building features and accents that help to define the architectural style. Items such as prominent tower elements, an appropriate color palette, recessed entries and windows, arched entryways and balcony features, decorative window and door surrounds, elements of prominent wall depth, smooth exterior wall finishes, and variable wall planes. All these items work together in presenting a traditional design aesthetic. The design of the Mission Flats mixed-use development is intended to complement and respect the historic nature of the mission, the surrounding area, and adjacent properties. The architectural landscape design respects the local heritage and will be appealing to commercial patrons, residents, and guests. The project will realize new commercial opportunities for this area of Oceanside, while also providing additional housing options for the community. Mission Flats implements goals, intents, and objectives of the city's general plan, zoning ordinance, and most importantly, the Mission San Luis Rey Historic Area Development Program and Design Guidelines. Thank you for your time this evening. As I mentioned, our project team is on the line and will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Dan, I have a question, if no one else has any questions for Dan, the architect, or the Lightfoot Planning Group representative. Dan, I have a question for you regarding the profiles. The architectural profiles we're looking at seem like they were up from the street level. Do we have a profile of what it's going to look like with the neighboring buildings? I'm not sure if I had seen that from the city representative or from your presentation. Do you have something like that? This is Andy Guatelli from the chairman's seat, by the way.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. It's a little difficult to hear you all tonight, but I think it's working. We have worked with staff on, providing different visual perspectives, and Brian may want to chime in from KTGY, but we did prepare a perspective looking back from Mission Avenue, looking to the south across the shopping center as to what you might see behind the shopping center. That's in the hard drawings you received. I don't believe that's in either. It's not in my presentation. I don't believe that's in Shannon's staff's presentation unless she has that as a backup, and I don't know if she does on her slides. But we did prepare that. That was a question that came from one of the DRC members when we had that meeting back in June. And so we wanted to show what that is, and there really is a minimal view, depending on how far you are away. Obviously, the horizontal depth of the shopping center to Mission makes a difference in where your viewpoint is, and if you're walking along Mission or driving. But we wanted to try to provide the viewpoints that would be the most readily viewed from the outside edges of the property, and that's what we did.
Dan, I'm trying to get a better understanding. I think one of your slides from Highway 76 shows what it would look like if you were sitting in the driver's seat and going past the project, correct?
Correct. You're asking if what the view from Highway 76 might be?
Those
are the perspectives, southerly side of the project.
So it almost masks the berm, the highway berm that has nothing to do with the project will almost mask the ground floor, and the trees, I believe the trees that are there are Caltrans trees, so those will still be there, or are these going to be removed as part of this project? I'm not sure.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, correct. The berm certainly has played into the edge condition of this project and the grade in the site. Now that's Caltrans. The trees on Caltrans right-of-way will remain. The berm really serves to help screen the project from that side. You really don't see the first two floors for quite a bit of this project from that edge. And that's the berm that was created when they graded out Highway 76.
Right.
So that condition's set, but I think it's utilized well to integrate with this project.
No, that's very good. One last thing, and if you've been to several of these, you probably know what I'm about to ask about. Antenna, satellite dishes, or anything else that's part of the HVAC that's going to be visual, that'll break up the good work you've done with the architecture here. Are we going to see any of that on this or on this profile or not?
Mr. Chairman, it's a little hard to hear the question. I believe you're asking about would satellite dishes and similar antenna be allowed to be installed on balconies or on the facade of the building, correct?
Yes, that's one thing. Or above the roof line, would there be any like HVAC units or anything that'll be kind of break up the look and feel of the project?
No, I believe the intent is to keep the facades as pure as possible. The HVAC systems are intended on the roof, but behind the roof peaks, so they wouldn't be visible, which is very common with many multifamily buildings. I could defer to Todd Cadwell. Todd, if you want to chime in on any of that, I'm sure that, they'll revolve to building management, but I don't believe the intent is to provide any of those items that are visible.
You're correct, Dan. We don't allow individual satellite TV antennas on the project, and we don't install any ourselves.
Okay, very good. With that, I don't have any more questions for the applicant at this point. Does any of the other commissioners, have any questions for the applicant after that presentation?
I do not, Mr. Chairman.
Not seeing any more questions, I'm going to move down the line. I understand we have another staff presentation. Is that correct?
So I'd like to move for staff approval.
1 second, Commissioner Daly and Chairman Gotelli, if we could open it up for the public and let Ms. Vitale.
That's right.
Do we have any public comments that have been submitted?
Chair, Commissioners, we do not.
Okay.
No public comments submitted to be read in front of this commission or presented as part of the item. So now you can move forward with discussion amongst the members and motions.
And just to clarify, there was no public on the call, right?
That's correct. They have to submit comments in advance of the meeting.
Okay. All right. So we're not taking verbal on the call. All right. Sorry, that's just a little out of step with our normal procedure, so I had to ask. All right. Are we going to have another presentation or from planning or the city, or do we just open this up for comments?
This body would bring it back to the body for a discussion item and a motion.
Okay. So I guess we'll open it up for the commissioners to discuss and comment amongst ourselves.
I was hoping one of the other commissioners might be able to speak on whether this is a good representation of mission revival architecture. I'm not an expert myself, and I just wonder if anybody had any input on that.
John?
Yeah, over the years, the projects that have been brought forward to us in this situation where they're not close to the mission itself, I'd say this is a good example of a positive design. When I was going to speak, I was going to speak to that issue. I believe the design of the project is actually really good. They have on all sides of this project constraints. They have an expressway, probably future freeway on the south. They have an a commercial area, the back of stores, and to the north. And then, of course, they have that little tiny entranceway there on Douglas to the west. So I think they've done a really good job with the design of this project, with the help of the city and the different agencies that they've been working with. I think they've come to an excellent project. I think what we should expect.
I would also like to add to that comment that if you go further to the east, we went over a residential project that had similar architecture that's already out there. And this actually looks, if I had to do a beauty contest, I would say this one looks even a little bit better than that. All right, so that's just my 2 cents on that issue. Is there any other discussion items on this issue? On this item for the consideration? John?
Mr. Chairman, I was going to address Commissioner Slawowski's.
Absolutely, go ahead.
Having sat on a couple of historic commissions, not in the state, it's a delicate balance when you're placed with design guidelines and trying not to slip into faux historicism. And I think the applicant's architect has done a wonderful job of staying within the guidelines, but also not falling into faux historicism. So I think this is a really good example of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. I have, if you'll allow me, I have one comment on this item. aside from the architecture and, as John pointed out, the challenges that they met and exceeded. One of the things that would be good if we can add it to the project as a historic from an OPAC standpoint would be a plaque, a historic marker identifying what this property was as a historical description. The other thing that I also could suggest is in the lobby of the building. I know they did this at Petco Park, but they allowed a small break front of items that were found on the property during grading and also salvaged from buildings that they demolished, and just put it in the lobby of the building. That might be good. We could add in John's photos and have them on site as well in that break front. It's not a, I'm not asking large expenses, but just items to mark the historical use of the property in the past. So.
Chair and Commission, if I may, the applicant is planning to do a plaque to honor the history of the Jones Ranch. So that has been in discussions.
Okay. Well, and as far as a small break front displaying prior use photos that John has documented on the house, the residence, as well as the property, and maybe some artifacts, either that were recovered during grading. A lot of times these are aside from Native American artifacts, which of course, go to a separate facility, but anything that's found on the property. I understand that the grist mill and by the way, the historic report was excellent on this one. The house and so on was moved several times and has been scoured through, and there's not much left of the original value in it, but if some of that could be incorporated into a small display using John's photos, I think it would be an added benefit. Other than that, I had no other comment on the building itself.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, first of all, they're not John's photos. It's a requirement that some properties be photo documented, and this is one that met that requirement. The buildings that are on this particular piece of the Jones Ranch are not remainder buildings of their earlier history in the valley. Most of these buildings were moved. There's old service stations, barns, a whole bunch of mismatched buildings on the property. So the history of the Jones Ranch really is in other places. They own the shopping center next to it. They own the mobile home park across the street. They owned a lot of property there. In 1916, things changed a lot with the flood they had. They moved things around. But this is a remainder parcel. This isn't something they primarily lived on. So just don't limit yourself by saying specifics. You let them do what they want to do to go ahead and celebrate the Jones Ranch. And I'm sure the family will be forthcoming to give photos that possibly of some of the older buildings. And, I don't know what artifacts they have, but in any case, yeah, this is a remainder parcel. There really wasn't anything of any significance left on this property.
Right. That's, yeah. Let me clarify. What I'm suggesting then is, then they're already doing the marker, but to have the photos together with some of the artifacts, either they donate or things that are dug up during construction, or something that's salvaged out of one of the buildings, or one or more of the buildings. Okay. Anyway, with that said, I would like to close the discussion unless there's somebody else that would like to contribute. Nope. All right. Council liaison comments.
Commissioner, Chairman Guttelli, we needed to make a motion on the item.
Sorry. Motion to accept consideration and approve development plan D19-00017, conditional use permit, historic permit H19 quadruple 02, and a variance V20 quadruple 04 to construct a mixed-use project at the northeast corner of Douglas Drive and Highway 76 Mission Flats applicant, Mission Flats LLC. Do I hear a second?
Was there a first? That was the motion.
Okay, just for clarity purposes, the motion on the floor is a staff recommendation to the Planning Commission of approval of the project as contained within the resolution 2020-H01. We have a motion and
I second the motion.
a second. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any way you can turn the microphone on for the applicant? It went off. There you go. Thank
Okay.
you.
I hope.
Okay, so
Sorry
we have a
about that.
motion and a second on the floor, and I'll just do a roll call for all those in favor. If you're in favor, say aye, and I'll start with Commissioner Solowalski, Commissioner Hunt, Commissioner Gustafson, Chairman Gotelli,
Aye.
Commissioner Daly, and Commissioner Sheesh.
Aye.
A unanimous vote, that is 6-0 for the approval recommendation to the Planning Commission with one absent member, and that being Vice Chair Mendibles. And you can proceed to the next item, Chairman Gotelli.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Sorry, the telephone the mic keeps going off, and I occasionally look over and see it's off, so. Moving on to council liaison comments.
Chairman Gotelli, we have a discussion item before we get to council liaison comments. Item number 3.
I'm sorry.
I can go at the very end.
Okay, sorry, jumped the gun here. Discussion item for historic preservation in conjunction with Phase 2 of the general plan update. And we have a presentation by Stephanie Cervantes, the planner 2.
Chair Gotelli, I'm Russ Cunningham with the city's planning division. Commissioners, good evening. Thanks for letting us join you this evening. Just by way of introduction, I want to provide just a little bit of background on our forward planning efforts. Last year, the City Council adopted the first phase of the city's general plan update. That involved the introduction of 2 new general plan elements, one addressing economic development and the other addressing energy and climate action. We also adopted the city's first climate action plan. As part of the economic development element, we promulgated goals and policies that encourage the city to really consciously identify and protect, enhance, and leverage city assets that promote economic development in Oceanside, and that includes historic and cultural assets. And so we are now moving on to the second phase of the general plan update, which involves the updating of the city's existing general plan elements, most of them state mandated: land use, mobility, housing, conservation and open space, community facilities, safety, and noise, and 2 precursor projects that are meant to provide policy direction for the general plan update: a community plan for the South Morrow Hills area, and a corridor plan, a specific plan for the city's major east-west corridors: Mission Avenue, Oceanside Boulevard, and Vista Way. In the context of Phase 2, we come before you to ask you some very fundamental questions about what you think historic preservation ought to look like going forward, and how we can take the opportunity that this project presents to establish direction for historic preservation going forward. We expect that the land use element and the conservation and open space elements will contain the bulk of the policy direction for historic preservation going forward. So we're here tonight for 2 purposes. One, to inform you about the policy and regulatory frameworks that govern and guide historic preservation in Oceanside currently, some of the state and federal resources that are available to the city, to staff and to residents and to bodies like this to guide historic preservation. and to inquire with you as to how we, again, going forward, emphasize what is worth emphasizing about the city's history and how we utilize historic preservation as a means of branding the city, enhancing economic development, enhancing a sense of place and a sense of community here in Oceanside. So we're asking you to engage with us in a very preliminary, high-level, informal, and low-stress discussion on historic preservation. We will make no decisions tonight. We will come back to you in the future with more details, and we may be asking for formal recommendations in the future, but this today is really just a discussion. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie for additional background.
Thank you, Russ. As Russ mentioned, my name is Stephanie Cervantes from the Planning Department, and I'm going to give just a brief presentation kind of framing the discussion and giving you some main themes to think about for our discussion. So the main goal today, as Russ mentioned, is to show the importance of this body in the process of the general plan element, and also to get some early feedback. And I want to start that by asking, what should be included in the story of Oceanside? Oceanside has a very rich history, which includes Native American settlements, Spanish exploration and colonialism, Mexican rule, the Homestead era, the Western Railroad network, World War II, as well as Camp Pendleton. We have a large agricultural history as well as a surf culture within the city of Oceanside. So as part of the update, how might the city's history be revisited, reimagined, and retold? And what should be included in the story, and how should that story be told? Now that you're thinking about those events, people, things, etc., I want to lay out the background policy framework for you. As mentioned before, the city currently has the two general plan elements that speak to historic and cultural resources, which include the land use element and the environmental resource management element. Land use was adopted in 1989. The environmental resource management element was adopted in 1975. Phase one of the update included the elements that Russ mentioned, economic development and energy and climate action. And the phase two is a more comprehensive update, which will include the land use element, which will remain called the land use element, and the new conservation open space element. The city does have federal and state regulations that we must adhere to. I won't go into great detail regarding each office and program, but I'll just give you basic objectives and functions at those levels. So at the federal level, the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966 established the National Register of Historic Places. It authorizes funding for local governments. It established the review process for protecting cultural resources, and later on it created the Certified Local Government Program, which the City of Oceanside is considered a certified local government. At the state level, we have the California Register of Historical Resources, General Plan Guidelines, state funds from Mills Act, and as well as the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. At the city level, we have several different documents that pertain to historic preservation, including Chapter 14A of the Municipal Code, which gives us the purpose of historic preservation. It creates the language to create this committee, and as well, it has language regarding historic areas and site designation criteria and procedures. Article 21 and Article 23 of the zoning ordinance lay out historic and neighborhood conservation overlay districts. And then we also have planning division protocols, including the 1992 survey, historic assessments, the photo archiving policy, and as well as standard conditions of approval that are placed on all development projects pertaining to treatment of tribal resources. So keeping that framework in mind and keeping those themes in mind, we now want to move the discussion at looking at some of the existing portions of our general plan. The first section we want to look at is section 1.33 of the land use element. This is a subsection under the special management areas of the land use element, which includes other special areas of the city, including the airport area, coastal zone, Gohomey Park. So this section states the city shall utilize adopted criteria such as the Mission San Luis Rey Historic Area Development Program and design guidelines to preserve and further enhance designated historic and cultural resources. And the questions we're posing to you today regarding this section is, this section specifically focuses on the mission. What are some other areas that should be designated as historic districts? What criteria should be applied in assessing historic significance? And how do we ensure that resources within designated districts are properly protected and maintained? And I will open it up to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie Cervantes. There's a question on the floor for comments regarding the 3 questions that are asked here under the land use element 1.33. Is that correct?
Chair, that is correct.
All right, thank you. Just wanted to clarify that. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Russ, for framing this. I'm pretty passionate about this, and I thank you for including us on early conversations. As I mentioned earlier, I've been part of the Frank Lloyd Wright Historic District. I sat on historic preservation in the town of Oak Park, Illinois. We actually, while I was a commissioner, we actually subdivided and created 2 new districts. Oak Park has a total of 4. And it was a challenge, but we had to start somewhere, and it starts with conversations like this. So when I moved into town here, I found it really challenging, the question of how should the story of Oceanside be told? My ear was bent from, talking to folks, and the passion was ignited to the point where I wanted to join this commission. And I'm also part of the development community. I should put that out there. I'm an architect. I've done development work, and I also do entitlement work. So this is the playground that I play in. But I also am driven by a book, and sorry, thank you for letting me ramble on a bit here, but there's a book written called The Architecture of Happiness, and it isn't really about happy architect, it's about happiness as in content, and I see a shaking head over there, so it's a wonderful book. And one of the quotes that I carry around with me from that book says that the buildings bracket that we design should not be the lesser of the fields that they replace, and meaning that if you're going to replace an open field that has a kind of history like the Jones Farm, we should be intentional in doing that, and we should, and as designers and people who have an impact on the built environment, we should also be cognizant of the actual history, the story, and so the story has importance on how it's told. Before you even get to questions about which district and things like that. Also being part of the development community, I'm an agent of change. The development world, that's what they live by, change. And change is happening in Oceanside to a big degree. That's what drew me to live here versus other towns along the coast. I drove up the Coast Highway and said, oh my God, this is wonderful. There's a lot of things good things to be done here. So areas to include, there's in terms of housing stock, this town is started as a beach community. It has deep roots there. So there's little bungalows and things like that. I think, someone with deeper knowledge about that, maybe John, can help guide us in to see, because my recollection is before I got here, there was a district, a bungalow district established somewhere between the 5 and Coast Highway. Is that correct, John?
No,
Not yet?
never was.
Never was? Then I vote for that.
The Mission San Luis Rey is the only district we have.
Or conservation, there's a long history of those very cute bungalows. I thought I heard that somewhere before I joined the commission. If
Local
not-
areas, they have brought that attention to them, but there's never been anything done through OPAC, which is this commission, and requires us a larger city action to do that.
So I will put it out there that I have worked on areas like that. It's a passion for me, and if I will say it before anybody else does, I am conflicted because I'm an agent of change, but I also like to preserve part of the town's history wherever I happen to be working. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. So and that's where creativity comes in that charge. So thank you for indulging me on the long speech, but and I don't know if this will lead to finer points, Ms. Cervantes, or.
Chair Gutierrez, if I might.
Yes.
I just want to acknowledge a comment from Commissioner Scheis that there are really more fundamental questions here than the question of whether there ought to be additional historic districts in Oceanside. To Commissioner Daley's point, we have just one at this time, and that's the Mission San Luis Rey Historic District, for which we have a development program and design guidelines. The general question is, are there other areas of the city that you think might merit some designation as a historically significant area? But I think more fundamentally, we do want to ask the question, actually Stephanie did ask the question earlier, about how we tell the story of Oceanside and what components of that story are worth telling. So maybe we get to that, and maybe that's what generates some ideas from the commissioners at a higher level. But if you do have some thoughts on areas of the city that maybe do merit acknowledgement, further recognition, we'd love to hear that.
Well, I'd like to go ahead and make some comments.
Yes, go ahead.
I've been on the commission a long time, and we're a certified local government, and we're that because that's what allows this commission to be sitting here the way it sits. In the old days, and I'm not really sure how they're treated anymore, CLGs, but we got subsistence a little bit occasionally from the state. We were tied into the SHPO's office pretty closely, and so we're a step above a regular historic commission in a community, and at least in California we are. And we've done a lot of things, and if I had to just point one frailty we have is we don't have a demolition ordinance. And let me just tell you what that means. That means that somebody comes to the counter at the building department and says, I got this old piece of crap building here, and I need to get it down, and the person that's taking that order at the time is relatively new and passes that thing on to the next thing, and possibly someone in planning, not so much anymore, but in the past, possibly somebody in planning say, yeah, okay, that sounds fine. In a 1920, bungalow that had some possibilities of being important, gone. While we would then do a 1951 South Oceanside house, and they would catch that and make them do it. So the disparity between what we look at sometimes, because if you've seen the book that's the one they refer to, the survey, the assessment done in 1992, that's actually an update from the 1985 one that was done originally. It's a couple hundred resources. Think about it. We're a town of 180,000 people. That means there's 30,000 resources out there, at least. So you know there's a lot more than a couple hundred. That wasn't meant to be every important building in Oceanside or resource. So one of the things is, to me, is really important is we need to set aside the time to think about how we, in a smart way, do a demolition ordinance. And I will bring myself out here too, because you guys probably don't know who hell I am. I'm a real estate broker. 50 years I did development in Oceanside. For 25 of those years, I did mostly development out in the San Luis Rey Valley. So I mean, I'm a real estate broker that made his living selling land for houses. So while I don't really do that anymore, and I don't really do much downtown at all or in historic buildings or anything, I still have that same idea in my mind that there is value to property and there's rights. So just because it's old doesn't mean we have to keep it. And a great example I think I give you guys is the only thing in the recent past we've had where the city says, okay, we'll do that, was when the Top Gun house was being moved. When they first started the development years ago, and it's about a 30-some year wait for this hotel to get built, so they dealt with it at the very beginning, and it was pretty clear the city was going to have it demolished. And very fortunately for Oceanside, a group in San Diego called SOHO, Save Our Heritage Organization, stepped forward and said, we have attorneys. You want to go against us? And even better than that, 15 years ago when Jeremy Cohen, who is the gentleman that runs S.D. Malkin's project here in Oceanside, said, we dealt with them in San Diego, and it took us 2 years waiting because they stopped us and they effectively could do that. He says, I will move the house and restore it. And so just so you know, the moving the house hasn't changed the historical context. It's still historically just as important by being moved. So what I'm suggesting is there's very few properties out there that aren't going to be, or that can't be touched for any reason. But we at least have to know what's going on with these properties. And so we have to have the opportunity somehow to at least cursorily look at the property and realize, oh, okay, that's not important. And we can usually do that in a matter of a few days or a week or two. And now we have a different level of reports. We have a letter that we're doing these days, and that's another possibility. But I think it's really important to realize that one of the most important things we do is we kind of step in the way of people going, yeah, let's do anything we want. Well, no, but it isn't effective unless there's actually written policies to do that or rules to do that. And so I think, Russ, what you're looking at from my perspective, one of the most important things is set up a way the thing actually works. God bless, let's have districts everywhere, but that's a bigger challenge that I'm willing to take on right now. I'm more interested in let's don't lose resources by not paying attention to what we have now, and it just walks away from us. Because as we know, it's going to be more and more difficult with the way things are going to work within cities, and to go ahead and have things just be caught and made sure nothing happens to them and make sure they go through the proper resource or the proper development line. And that's my most important thing to say, I think, is that. I mean,
really
there's a lot
appreciate
more
that.
to say, and I certainly will address that and send you some notes. But to me, that's the demolition ordinance for Oceanside is the most important thing to work on right now.
Well, we appreciate that very concrete suggestion of bringing more teeth to our policies and protocols regarding demolition of older structures. Planner Greenbauer has developed, in response to this concern, a policy that we as staff follow when we get proposals for the demolition and replacement of older structures. Hopefully you're finding some value in that. That's the policy that leads to, at the very least, the photo archiving, to, in some cases, historic resource assessments, and ultimately that could lead to a CEQA process that either results in the preservation of that resource, the relocation of that resource, or a finding of overriding considerations that would allow
And if
its
you don't mind, I
demolition.
just want to step in here and say, don't think what I said was a slight on the planning department at all. I mean, they're doing a really good job with what the resources they have, but they're not the only ones that get to start this process. It doesn't always go to them in a way that it's direct and they have full responsibility for it. So that's part of what I think it all has to be put together in a larger way.
Just to kind of add to that, I don't think it's the adding of or putting teeth to the issue. It's more of clarifying a mechanism to capture these resources where it's applied uniformly across different elements of the city. So when someone comes in, I want to do an addition, okay, or I want to do a remodel, and this house was built in 1922 or something, you know, and how do we capture that in a more of a uniform manner? And the teeth issue comes up when you've captured it and they still don't want to follow the recommendations. Now what do you do? You know, if there's nothing written about how to enforce that or how to slow it down enough to consider other options. But I think the main concern, if I understood what John was saying, was a mechanism that could kind of be applied uniformly across different parts of the city, if that makes sense to you.
It does. The policy that I mentioned, that directive, is available really only to staff. It's an internal document. It would be helpful, I think, if the community were aware of that protocol. So at the very least,
put it on the
going
website.
forward, we can find a way to better inform the community, the development community, property owners, et cetera, of that protocol. So we appreciate these comments. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Hunt.
I know Russ and Stephanie are looking for suggestions, not more questions, but a couple things, and it might show my ignorance, but is the demolition permit a discretionary action or more of like a ministerial process, or is it?
Demolition is ministerial, unless it's in the coastal zone. There's different, areas of the city that it might fall into a discretionary action, but typically demolition is just over the counter.
Okay,
ministerial. So understand the comment from Commissioner Daly regarding an ordinance of some type for demolitions. We run across that quite a bit.
Yeah, just from my experience as a cultural consultant elsewhere, where I worked for a city up in Northern California where they had a pier and they said, oh, we're going to demolish it. We did a CE for that. But then all of a sudden they had a federal nexus and the Army Corps got involved. And they said, well, gosh, you really shouldn't even been able to do a CE because you had a pier that was built, I forget, it was 80 years old or something. And it should have been, you can't, there's an exception to the exemption if it's a potential historical resource and you haven't formally evaluated it. I'm just thinking of if the CEQA itself language would help with that. Or another question, is there a will and a budget for updating the historic resource survey? And do you have already a consultant team that's helping you with the general plan update and new sections, that type of thing? Or?
Commissioner Hunt, appreciate that question. It is something we're exploring. It's not within our current scope of work. It certainly could be an action item that comes out of this general plan update.
Right, and the reason I bring it up is I know it's tough when you have, say, a downtown commercial district that has some historic character. What's tough is either if you haven't done a survey and defined here's a cluster of historic buildings that retain integrity of setting and that type of thing, it's easy to piecemeal away that context. And so there's a benefit to having them defined.
So perhaps the survey could go beyond identifying, say, just individual resources on a piecemeal or kind of scattershot basis, and maybe also look at, as you said, clusters or concentrations of resources and identify those geographically? Correct.
And I understand we're not our city is not the size of a Los Angeles or San Diego, but that something like Survey LA, where they did the whole city of LA, they've done some really amazing work that's at least, it might be able to be some of the technology they developed, some of the themes they established might be easily adopted without having to reinvent the wheel on those.
Yeah, we did a context on the transportation history of Oceanside years ago, and it was relatively inexpensive. Fortunately for us, the consultant fell in love with the report, and it was a 50-page report by what we're going to pay her. It was a 200-page report when she was done. And doing a context of the history is kind of what you're speaking of, and the different aspects of how history is looked at. That's probably something that also can be looked at if there's something contextual that, like transportation, because transportation is all touches everything. If we have other things like that, that's also another way of attacking it, not in the specific homes. The surveys we have, like the one we have now that was done in 92, updated, they're windshield surveys. And they're done with minor amount of really work about the real history of the property. What they do is they make sure they have people that are well-versed already about architecture and everything else that are doing the report, so they can tell right away what the architecture is. They just have to do this small amount of work to go ahead and get the, possible date of building and all the other things. But yeah, it wouldn't be inexpensive, and it's difficult because, again, we have a couple hundred right now, and there must be hundreds and hundreds more. By the rules of the feds, anything that's 45 years and older meets that requirement. So it is. You're looking at all of South Oceanside, you're looking at all of, certainly everything downtown, and almost, at the edge of the valley almost, but that didn't happen until after World War II. So if there's other contextual, surveys we can do, they're real valuable, I believe.
Russ, one of the things I want to also add in here is the context of the meeting is on a preservation standpoint, historic preservation standpoint. But we could also, if we're going to go in the direction of the planning department, we're establishing these districts, the other thing you could do is a restoration. If a cultural resource has been lost in a certain area, if you can come up with an example. I know John is not Commissioner Daley's not a fan of making these little parks of historic architectural examples, but something like that, it's more of a restoration and a preservation, but you can actually go more towards the restoration and give an example of what it was like. For example, the car culture along the 101 or the surf culture along the pier area or so on, but actually restore a little bit of the history of it, and not from like a museum, but something that you can interact with.
Yeah, the reality is, and Coast Highway is a good example, that there aren't a lot of physical remnants or emblems of the city's early history. There are some, but not a lot. So to Commissioner Daley's point about context and helping people understand that historic context and the cultural significance of that highway, its role in transportation and mobility in Oceanside, these are things we can find ways to highlight, perhaps through monumentation, textual exhibits, things of that sort. It's actually something we gave some thought to as part of the Coast Highway Corridor Study adopted a year ago that implements an incentive district. We are looking to see significant redevelopment on Coast Highway. In conjunction with that, can we integrate some markers of the highway's history? We're thinking about that.
You're talking about markers, and I would enhance that and say almost like a restoration. Show what it was like to go to a train station that's now gone, back then, or maybe a cable car example, or an electric light rail or something. It's something that it not only preserves but actually shows what it used to be like.
And where there might be an opportunity for that, Chair Gattelli, is with the redevelopment of the Oceanside Transit Center. Mm-hmm. It looks like that is imminent. I don't want to jinx it, but I do think that that's going to be moving forward, and we have talked about the opportunity that might present to introduce some of the city's history to visitors who come through the OTC. Mm-hmm. So we appreciate that suggestion. I know Commissioner Gustafson has a question.
If we do have input, is there a communication protocol with which we can share ideas with you in the future, or do we wait till the next meeting?
There's a slide with my email address, and you can provide written comments that way as well. And you can always also give me a phone call, but written comments would be appreciated.
Okay. I have been fortunate enough to spend the last year and a half traveling to Europe and other places where the architecture is by default old, from Sweden down to France, Germany, and I've you know, I have more photos of the buildings than I have of myself doing selfies or anything like that. But there's some really fun case studies I think we can learn from. But to go to your point about how to tell the story of Oceanside on a more macro context, on a more macro level, you know, even the project we saw tonight, the architect spends so much time making the building aesthetically beautiful, but what happens at nighttime? What's to say about the lighting for the night, to enhance the architecture at night? I think if there was special attention given to thoughtful nighttime lighting using LED lights, of course, which cuts the cost of regular halogens, that when people drive by, they're like, wow, this is actually very pretty. Lighting will change the facade and the appearance and would highlight the cultural significance potentially. That's all.
I also wanted to try to address the philosophy of your question. In asking us about who gets to tell the story of Oceanside and what story is that because it's unclear to you in working on this plan about who the story belongs to and what it is?
Commissioner, the questions are not necessarily because they are unclear to us. I think the general idea is that we want to hear what the public, what this body wants to include in the general plan. That's really what our position is to listen to the public, to this body, and include that information in the general plan as a final product. So we have our ideas of what we wish would be in there, but at the end of the day, it's really about what the public wants to see.
And to Stephanie's point, we are committed to a very robust and inclusive engagement process. So, Commissioner, if your question to some extent is, how inclusive are we going to be in inviting people to comment on the city's story, so to speak, and to contribute to that story, we want to be as inclusive as possible.
And do you envision actually a written history beyond what's available on the city website, like a formal tome of history of the city?
So we have a couple of additional slides, and on one of those slides, we lay out what we think could be appropriate content addressing historic preservation in our general plan, likely in the element that Stephanie will be managing, the conservation and open space element. And one of those bullet points, I don't know if maybe we go to that slide, is that story, that history. And so what we have found in some examples within the region, for example, the city of San Diego has a dedicated historic preservation element. They've dedicated an entire element to historic preservation. And that element, it's actually fairly brief, it's 25 pages long roughly, begins with a brief narrative history of the city of San Diego and a timeline, which is not something that exists in any of our documents at this time. So that'd be a question to you and to the community. Is that something that we see as being worthwhile as a component of the general plan?
Please.
I was going to say, one of the things I noticed while reviewing the city's mission, vision, and values is I was pleased to see how much diversity was mentioned. And not just because of, what we're having right now with the marches, but I think I've seen some of I'm trying to know the right word for it, but cities like the city of Riverside, they developed a historic Latino context statement. There's certain, I think that would definitely be a topic to include, is make sure that we reflect our diversity, which is one of the things that drew me here. So
appreciate that. Yes.
So when you talk about the story of Oceanside, the story of Oceanside is its people, because no building built itself. The people came here and did things. And the diversity of people that came here over the years was very broad, larger than a lot of areas. And so everyone had a story. So that's one of the frailties you have when you ask about what's Oceanside's story. Well, your story in Oceanside is different, your story is different, my story is, so it's all the stories. The Historical Society already has what you're asking for. They have short histories, they have timelines. We've had that for the longest time. We just probably don't know, or you don't know, that that's there and available for you. So we'll make sure you get that. But the people are really what make Oceanside unique. I mean, I lived here my whole life, and I can't believe the number of people that I've met over the years and the diversity of them, and also the uniqueness of them. So it's almost like just a magic place. I mean, I've been very lucky to meet a lot of people maybe most people don't know, but it's one of those things that's what's made our town click and made so many things happen, the development things, and just people who ran government and everything. Our first mayor was actually a Mormon with 2 wives. Who would have guessed? So I mean, we have all kinds of strange things in history in our community going on that just led us to just eventually build this. And that's why it's kind of the raucous community that it is, I believe, because we have a background in that. We've always been that way. And we've been the kind of community that has gotten along. I always like to go ahead and make my high school, Oceanside High School, sound like, it should have been the model UN. Because at my high school, there was every kind of person, religion, everything you can imagine up there. And that's what made Oceanside, I think, strong as a community to continue all the years it has because of the people. So it's a difficult story to tell the individual stories, but it's the story of Oceanside. All the different people have come here and provided the things they did, the number of piers they built, the types of things they've done that they didn't do in other communities. They were just unique people in that sense.
So I do, in your comments and others, hear a theme that we need to be cognizant that history and our understanding of it has a lot to do with our perspective and our subject position and where we're coming from. So I think that'll be a very important thing to acknowledge in the element for sure. Appreciate that input.
Commissioner Daly, yeah, I thank you for your comments, because one of the things that we had noticed as staff is that the existing language really focuses on structures and resources, and especially with the atmosphere that we're in right now, there's not a lot of focus on people and events that are important to the city as well. So I think that's some of the information that we want to include in that update is, not just focus on structures and how to preserve those, but how to bring the important people that made Oceanside be part of that story. How do we include the events that are important to the history of Oceanside in that? And as well as how do we preserve those people? How do we keep those people in the memories, preserved on sites, with plaques, with murals? Those are really the kind of ideas that we want to include in that new language that we have.
The Transit Center redevelopment, I think, will be a very big opportunity for us to tell our story and incorporate everything that or elements that you just suggested and mentioned. Because the major development, the boom of Oceanside, would not have happened unless the railroad station was established. I mean, many people overlook that we are the first city in San Diego. Even though we were the last recently to redevelop and come into our own, in comparison to Solana, Carlsbad, Del Mar, we are the first. And I think that adds a lot of value to our story. So when the transit center is redeveloped, which is inevitable, we could look to that as an opportunity to incorporate, many of our facts.
One additional comment is, and speaking of what John was saying about the people that are here, we are blessed that we have a lot of different cultures that come onto the base that are military, and that's what they're here for. And I do a lot of work on the base, and it's a shame that some of the museums and historic structures on there that people do not know about that are over there. And it would be nice if we could somehow share that or have them share it with us. We can't, and obviously the public can't be invited to walk onto a military installation, but maybe if they could on a rotating basis or something, have a facility where they could, display this history with the rest of the general public. As I said, it's a shame some of these are, I've been to, the few things, the Mechanized Museum and the Historic Ranch and so on that's out there, but there's a lot of people that don't know these things exist.
Chair Gattilli, we will be engaging Camp Pendleton in the course of this general plan update on quite a number of questions, and that's definitely something that we can raise and discuss with them.
Excellent.
Certainly, Camp Pendleton is an important part of this city's history. We want to acknowledge that.
Stephanie, could you make sure you send your email address to all of us?
I will, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a comment. So I've got to be honest and tell you, Russ and Stephanie, that when I read this, I marked it up because I'm thinking, boy, in summary, staff is requesting input. It was like, it was so vague. I tried to take it apart, put my arms around it, but this discussion has brought a lot of clarity. And the clarity is we've heard from different members, but for me, it's starting to look like a decision cone. We're up at the very top, and we've talked about people, but I think before people and before stories is really the values of the town. And that's the real story you want to tell. John hit it, I think, on the mark from being a recent incomer. It's about diversity. It is a novel word people throw around, but I think John is absolutely right. What I've read is that this was a confluence of many types of people from different backgrounds that really brought the town together, the railroad. So in my view, the top thing is values. Values will inform the stories we want to tell. And then from stories, you go to identifying resources. What are the resources that really grow from the stories? And from there, it gets more and more specific to the criteria. What criteria do we use to protect those resources? And when you get down to the bottom, we're no longer inventing anything. Those, for example, how do you protect it? The Department of Interior has templates for that. Other towns have things called certificate of appropriateness. So when a building application is filed for an identified resource, it raises a flag and says, hey, somebody's got to take a look at this. So the good news is we're not going to be inventing a wheel, but we do need to figure out starting up at a high level and then include it, like Russ, you mentioned, for a very broad input on the values of the town and the stories, things like that. So that's exciting to me. I'm in for this game. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, Commissioner Hunt, go ahead.
Also, going back to my background is originally archaeology, and I did have a mentor at some point that said, the problem with cultural resources management is there's too many damn archaeologists. And because we tend to see everything in that light, and preservationists tend to see everything in a preservation light. But getting back to cultural resources are things that are important to people. It ties back into why is this there, and then you can get those creative mitigation strategies where you don't necessarily have to preserve every building, but can you tell the story or why it's important or what happened here? I don't know if this is a good idea or not, but I wouldn't want to see a city just with QR codes all over the place. But I've noticed with the city's Instagram account and the Historical Society, they're getting a lot of enthusiastic feedback on, preservation images, whether it's the old piers or some of the African-American pioneers in the town. So I could see we're somewhere at the transit center. We're not going to necessarily save the existing structures and we don't have the original structures, but if it's something where a visitor could come in and click on something and all of a sudden get a slideshow or something like that, where you don't necessarily, it might be cheaper than plaques and those type of things. I don't know, just an idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
How to tell the story.
Interesting suggestion.
Are there any additional comments? So just regarding this slide that's up right now, so as I had mentioned earlier, as staff, we kind of have an idea of what we would like to see in there. So this is kind of a summary of that, which includes the brief narrative, history, and timeline, which we had discussed prior, a statement of purpose, the legal basis for historic preservation. As one of the commissioners mentioned, we do already have a lot of that in place. We don't need to reinvent it. The CLG requirements, criteria for historic designation, preservation policies, which would include districts, sites, structures, and also the role of development. I think that's one of the big areas that our existing language it touches on, but it could be improved on. Also capital improvement programming, economic development, and then parks and recreation programming as well. Is there any comments regarding what is on this list? Is there anything else that we should include on this list? Anything that should be taken out?
The existing language and ordinance and codes and plans, there's a heavy stress almost in all of them about the value of open space. And what do we do? What gets determined as valuable open space versus land for development? And that seems to be something that this commission in particular has input on, including natural resources and open land. So that'd be something worth adding in.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. So as part of the conservation and open space, we will be taking the city's draft sub-area plan and taking some of those policies and including them into the new element. I'm not sure how familiar this body is with the draft sub-area plan, but it is a document it's in draft form. It's about 20, almost 25 years old, which includes language about preservation, what kind of open space needs to be preserved for what reason. So that language will be included in that element. We're hoping to enhance on that language as well and make it easier for the development and public community to understand what the priorities of the city are to preserve open space versus what can be developed.
I really appreciate that question because it reminds me that our history is certainly about people. It's about the built environment, but it's also about what existed here before people in the built environment. So we have an understanding of native species, native habitat, native flora and fauna, as well as historic flora. So we're, I think, all familiar with the Brazilian pepper trees that you see primarily in the historic district that were brought here by the missionaries. That's worth noting. So appreciate the comment.
Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Stephanie. If there are no further discussions or comments on this, we'd like to bring that discussion item to a close, unless you have something to wrap up.
I did have just a quick wrap up, Chair. Thank you. So kind of next steps that were briefly mentioned in the memo that was provided to you, but definitely next steps that we will be coming back to this body will include technical studies related to the general plan as well as draft policy language. So we will be bringing that back to this body for recommendation for adoption. And in the future, we also hope to bring back any changes that will be needed for other documents, such as the 1992 survey, any updates or new language needed for the municipal code or zoning ordinance that would be in the purview of this body. So this is a very early discussion, and we will be coming back. It might not be in the next 6 months or in the next year, but we will be bringing back those items for your review and recommendation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. All right, with that closing, I'd like to move on finally to council liaison comments.
I think you guys have covered just about everything a few times. So. Thank you for coming tonight. I know it's been a little difficult with the new COVID rules. We're trying to manage as best we can with public communication and get everyone in here and keeping space. So if you have any concerns or any ideas about how we can do that better, let us know. So we're going to be, this will be a challenge for the next few months, minimally. So our council meetings are very challenging as well. And anything specific that comes up that you'd like to talk about further, I'll pass my card out to those of you I haven't met yet. And is this first meeting for anybody? For both of you? Okay, congratulations and welcome. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Council. With that, I'd like to have a motion on the floor for adjournment.
If we, Chairman Gutella, if we could go ahead and go through and let all commissioners, if they have any reports or comments that they want to close with, please.
Okay, sorry. Any additional comments from any of the commissioners regarding either new business or old business?
Okay, Chairman Gutella, with that, as the OPAC Secretary, I just let you know, I know it's bringing forward a time extension for the congregate care facility out at the Mission. They did benefit from our newest, the COVID-19 regulations, an automatic extension. They anticipate breaking ground within the next few months. I know they're submitting their grading plan, I believe, next week. So that project is moving forward next to the Mission area. They're getting all their monitors on contract because we know there's a lot of sensitive resources around that area. But I just wanted to let this commission know that is moving forward. So if you see earth movement or anything in that area, that's what's occurring. Beyond that, I have nothing else to pass.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And as a disclosure, I am involved in that project, so I would in the future, I would have to recuse myself of any more voting or anything like that on that issue. All right. Motion on the floor for adjournment this evening. Do I hear a second? Yes? All right.
For the record, meeting's adjourned, 7:31.
Thank you.